Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. He's talking about music, movies, art and culture, and this is Billboard Breakdown. Well, so much for the holiday slowdown. This was another one of those deceptive weeks on the Hot 100, where if you were only paying attention to the top 10, you'd see a lot of stasis. But descend down to the lower reaches of the charts and you see a whole lot of turbulence, as 2015 continues to flush away with some pretty huge gains coming up to replace them. The top 10 might sleep soundly for now, but I expect disruption sooner rather than later. But we need to talk about the top 10 anyway, so let's get through them quickly and move on to something that's actually interesting. Of course, Adele's Hello holds dominant at the very top. It rules YouTube, it's dominant in streaming, it's still gaining airplay, and while sales have softened, she's still on top there. And yet, Sorry by Justin Bieber is closing the gap at number 2, as he pushes streaming dominance with surging airplay, YouTube, and strong sales. What's not picking up is Hotline Bling by Drake at number 3, which is slipping hard on sales. Airplay is being kept solvent at this point by streaming and YouTube. For now. What do you mean by Justin Bieber at number 4 is bringing some real competition with more presence in streaming and on YouTube. Not enough to compensate for even weaker airplay and sales, but still notable there. The real Bieber story though comes from his next hit, rising up to number 5, Love Yourself, which has finally picked up some airplay to back up its streaming and sales. Who knows, it might actually have some viability as a hit after all. Now that pushed back The Hills by The Weeknd down to number 6, but that was gonna happen anyway, where despite some YouTube gains, it's only really holding onto its spot thanks to streaming and despite airplay losses. Similar case for Stitches by Shawn Mendes at number 7. Painfully weak sales plus peaked and falling airplay, even despite scraping through some streaming gains. What is holding steady is Here by Alessia Cara at number 8. And yes, I'll be covering the album, be patient, it's coming. And it's pretty much thanks to still gaining some airplay with some okay streaming, because those sales are not impressive and she's still got no YouTube. Not really the case for The Same Old Love by Selena Gomez, rising up to number 9, with stronger airplay gains and better sales. Yet, even despite some streaming gains, it's a bit behind, although I don't expect that to last. Now this Pushback Like I'm Gonna Lose You by Meghan Trainor and John Legend down to number 10 to round out our top 10, because while it did have respectable sales and solid airplay gains, it lost streaming this week. Not a good sign for the future there. And on that note, might as well talk about our losers and dropouts. And we had a busy week here, so let's start with the latter, as Photographed by Ed Sheeran, My Way by Fetty Wap and Monty, I'm Coming Over by Chris Young, and How Deep Is Your Love by Calvin Harris and Disciples all ended their respectable chart runs. Now that's probably not going to be the case for some of our losers, so let's get started by blowing through the expected Justin Bieber losses pretty quickly. No Pressure with Big Sean dips down to 96. The Pressure with Halsey fades down to 70. Company goes down to 95. Mark My Words slips down to 90. Purpose stumbles down to 85. And I'll Show You collapses down to 51. Now outside of those, what I notice most about our losses is continued inconsistency. Sure, Chris Brown's Liquor falling down to 99 is inevitable, but it's never had stability, mostly on account of the song being terrible. Then there's a slightly less of an excuse for Smoke Break by Carrie Underwood falling down to 83, but then again, country radio tends to rotate material out on a fairly consistent timeline. Probably explains why Nothing on You by Dan and Shay fell down to 69. Then we got the losses you would otherwise expect. Renegades by Ex-Ambassadors continues its exit down to 50. Drag Me Down by One Direction continues to underwhelm at 46. And Hit the Quan by I Love Menses continues its total collapse down to 45, and good riddance too. And finally, we've got the losses for Confident by Demi Lovato. And I put this up to bad timing more than anything, because while it's gaining in airplay, it might be a too little too late, especially considering a track this confrontational might not play this well for the holidays for most, as it dips down to 31. And yeah, that kind of sucks because the song really is awesome, but again, it's not had a particularly consistent chart run here. Of course, we've also got some competition, and where we need to talk about our returning entries and gains, and make no mistake, there were a lot of them this week. The returning entries all make a fair amount of sense. Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree by Brenda Lee comes back to 44 because, hey, it's the holidays. Save Dat Money by Lil Dicky featuring Fetty Wap and Rich Homie Quan barely comes back, hopefully as good holiday advice. And Beautiful Drug by Zac Brown Band comes back to country radio because they need something to plug in the gaps that might play well around New Year's. Why it's this from the Zac Brown Band and not Tomorrow Never Comes, I have no idea. But make no mistake, our gains in the charts this week were numerous. So let's start off with the easiest culprit over in country music. Home Alone Tonight by Luke Bryan and Karen Fairchild rising up to 67. And if this is the best country radio can do right now, I might as well get used to another disappointing year for the mainstream. But hell, it's not like hip-hop and the mainstream look hook was much better. Best Friend by Young Thug rising up to 72. Down in the DM by Yo Gotti picking up to 68. It's a bad sign when Me, Myself, and I by G-Eazy featuring Baby Rexha rising up to 36 might be the best of your gains in that genre. Of course, when you switch over to the poppier side, things look a little bit better. My House by Flo Rida continues to gain traction up to 55. Fall Out Boy and Demi Lovato pick up more traction with Irresistible at 84, and prove that Demi Lovato should just keep making rock music already. And 21 Pilots continues its unexpected rise with Stressed Out up to 28. Seriously, it's picking up some significant airplay. I'm genuinely shocked that it caught on. Of course, that gain is overshadowed by the meteoric rise of In the Night by The Weeknd. The gains this week to crack the top 20 at number 19 thanks to the video. Expect this to break into the top 10, and considering it's easily the best song on The Weeknd's last album, I'm actually pretty happy with that. Unfortunately, when you look at some of the other gains, I'm a little bit less happy. The least objectionable you get, Adventure of a Lifetime by Coldplay going to 39, and I Know What You Did Last Summer by Shawn Mendes and Camila Cabello rising up to 52. Mostly either on being bland or just slipping on their own potential. Then you got Stand By You by Rachel Platten surging up to 61, but hey, it's the holidays, it's got that uplifting sort of vibe, I can mostly tolerate this. A little bit less tolerable is One Call Away by Charlie Puth rising up to 75, but again, debuted last week, I'll cut it a bit of slack. What's not getting any slack from me is the newest rise for A New Americana by Halsey, and okay, seriously people, this is a protest song for kids who are so insulated in the bubble of their own self-satisfied privilege that they don't realize it's a shamelessly derivative mess that worships old school Americana more than any actual revolution. This song has been consistently panned by pretty much every critic I know, so why in the nine hells does it keep coming back? Is it just that hook? Seriously, it's not that good. But in any case, let's pray it stays near the bottom, and in the meantime, let's focus on our new arrivals. Starting with number 98, Drifting by G-Eazy featuring Chris Brown and Tory Lanez. All this hope and disregard, drifting off. I know you think there ain't no fall that far apart. And now I'm missing your love. So am I the only one who finds it a little bit weird that suddenly G-Eazy is charting real hits now? Seriously, I remember covering this guy around a year ago on Billboard Breakdown where some of his hits were barely there, and I'm not really seeing a huge progression between then and now, or a reason why he's charting and a rapper who might play to an analogous lane like, say, Logic isn't. In any case, he dropped his sophomore album, and this is one of 2 new songs hitting the charts from this guy, teaming up with the winning duo of Chris Brown and Tory Lanez to make a track that gets worse every single time I hear it. Because on the surface, it's not that bad. The life of touring and success naturally makes it harder to sustain a relationship back home, and now that things are collapsing, they find themselves missing the girl they left behind and kind of being reflecting about it. And you know, as much as I don't like him, Chris Brown's hook really is the best part of this song for capturing that emotion, especially against the guitar, because both Tory Lanez and G-Eazy blow it completely. Granted, in the first case, more of Tory Lanez's sloppy writing is the unsteady, fluttering melody that desperately needs more foundation than the sparse bass and flattened hi-hats, but with G-Eazy, dude, you're actively cheating on your girl back home with girls on the road. If you really gave a damn, you either bring her along or you just stop here. Now, to be fair, the framing is self-aware enough to realize he is behaving like an asshole, but also completely undercuts the sincerity of the hook that wants G-Eazy to be presented as sensitive or complicated or make any excuses for what he does, when in reality, he's not any of those things. It doesn't help matters that he's still a painfully boring MC whose wordplay is barely well-constructed enough to disguise his limp, Drake-esque delivery. It's not a good sign when I can say the best thing about this song is that Chris Brown's hook is fine, but honestly, that hook is good enough to keep this song in mediocrity instead of outright awfulness, so I'll give him that. Number 97, Sorry by Rick Ross featuring Chris Brown. You know, the more you think about it, it's kind of astounding how far Rick Ross's star has fallen over the past few years. And while you could point to the atrocious You Won't Even Know verse as the starting point, I honestly expected that he would stick around a little bit longer. After the underwhelming and mediocre records, the 2 of them that he released in 2014, he dropped a new album this year, and I don't think anybody really cared, even if the critical reception was a little bit better than those albums last year. In any case, this is his first charting hit in some time, with Chris Brown showing up yet again for the extended hook, and unlike last time, Chris Brown's probably easily the the worst part of the song. Not because of the writing though, but the absolutely gratuitous autotune slathered all over his voice as he tries to croon about his continuous stream of screw-ups when trying to apologize for them. You'd think for production this classy and slick, Chris Brown could have at least tried more here for a more organic performance. And that's the thing, you get the hook to say Usher or Miguel, this is easily said as a pretty damn great Rick Ross song. His flow and bars actually connect, that gleaming guitar and synth combination is smooth as hell, and the framing of the bragging works better than actually sounds pretty sincere and trying to win this girl back in order to treat her better. Now look, it's still all pretty vapid. The final verse is basically luxury rap bragging about everything that he's buying this girl once she's back in his life, but the sentiment is a tad more believable, and Rick Ross underplaying, it's not a bad sound for him. So in other words, I kind of like this, not bad at all. Number 94, Random by G-Eazy.
Told the world I need everything and some. Yeah, 2 girls, that's a tandem. She gon' do it all for me when them bands come. Got it all, yeah, I'm young, rich, and handsome. This shit is not random. Everybody ain't got it, understand, son. Yeah, this shit is not random.
And now we get our second G-Eazy track, and ugh, who told him that that badly tuned guitar melodic riff was a good idea? But putting that aside, this song reminds me most of one of the opening tracks off the most recent Meek Mill album, that song titled Lord Knows, which took a bombastic choral sample that had some real insane symphonic bombast, give it some real power. The big difference here is that the sample is not nearly as good, and G-Eazy is nowhere near convincing in this sort of bragging mold. If you don't get a phantom, you're gonna throw a tantrum? I'd say this might be satirical if the entire track wasn't taking itself so damn seriously, as G-Eazy tries to assert himself as better because he's got more money than his rivals, okay? He's doing the whole Meek Mill thing. Have to be honest here, money doesn't make up for a lack of personality, or the fact that there's not a single rhyme or bar here that I haven't heard done better elsewhere. Definitely glad I didn't waste my time covering the G-Eazy album now, because this, it's obnoxious as hell, and honestly, kinda sucks. Next, number 93, Backroad song by Granger Smith.
Out here cruising to a backroad song. I feel the wheels like a melody, like a radio dialing in strong. Come on, sing along to my backroad song.
Well, it took long enough. It's not usual when Canada gets country music before the United States, but I heard Backroad song by Granger Smith months ago, and I'm guessing he's finally charting now because country radio needs to fill time somehow. The funny thing is that Granger Smith has been around releasing albums since the late 90s independently before signing to Broken Bow Records this year. This song is off of an EP that he dropped after his 7th album in 2013, and yet that hasn't really translated into much on this song, which might as well be branded as yet another modern, by-the-numbers pop country track about cruising down a back road with his girl. Now, the funny thing is that with the exception of an unneeded synthetic backbeat, this track isn't that bad. The electric guitars have a bit of roiling melodic punch, Granger Smith's voice has natural charisma, and it's almost much more focused on enjoying the drive than any of the typical bro country leering. It's not really gonna be a song that I remember after this week, but I don't mind. This is fine. Number 89, Dessert by Dawin featuring Silento.
I want it all day long. I'm addicted like it's
What you gonna do with that dessert? Do what, dee da, dee da, dee da. Do what, do da, dee da, do da, dee da. Do what, do da, dee da, do da, dee da. Murder that dance floor.
So, just so you all know, Vine hits apparently aren't going away anytime soon, because following the wake of Shawn Mendes, we now have this Brooklyn EDM pop artist who notched his first major hit outside of the dance charts with this song, and what's worse, he dragged in Silento back with him. And look, at first I was actually inclined to be somewhat charitable this song. Dawin didn't sound terrible on the hook, and while Silento's vocals were pretty thin and unimpressive, he was trying to play for an innocently sweet love song with a little bit percussion heavy and a very restrained melody. I could mostly tolerate this. And then the drop happens and this song just turns painful for me. Not only do we have that chipmunk voice spewing absolute nonsense as the percussion starts hammering, complete with gang vocals and a buzzing squeal of a synth line that was so obnoxious that I was almost happy when Silento came back. Yeah, that's how grating this song is for me. That's where we get the second drop where the chipmunk voice tries to sound tough and gritty and just sounds constipated. And look, if you have a higher tolerance for that chipmunk voice, you might be able to take this song a lot more, but for me, this song was pure, unfiltered, cheaply produced, awful that just grated on my nerves. I never want to hear this song again. Next, number 77, Hands to Myself by Selena Gomez.
Keep making love to each other, and I'm trying, but I can't keep my hands to myself. Hands to myself. Can't keep my hands to myself. Hands to myself.
Oh, great. One of the worst songs off of Selena Gomez's Revival debuts in the charts thanks to a Victoria's Secret lip sync video before she dropped her own real music video for the song. And yet, in comparison to the audio torture that was Dessert, I'm almost inclined to be charitable to this. Yeah, the percussion-heavy gallop and synth layered over a formless guitar line doesn't do much for me, especially as they pile on the backing vocals in a desperate attempt to give the impression that Selena Gomez is invested in the song beyond a whisper that's too stilted to be sexy, and the lyrics imply that the drug concoction that she's currently on means that she can't stop touching people who she probably shouldn't. And then the song pulls the line, I mean I could, but why would I want to? This track has the feel of going to a rave with someone who has already taken too much E and Molly and won't stop groping you. Only less interesting, and this time you can't blame it on chemical dependence. But again, at least it's not Dessert by Dawin featuring Silento, but still, this is pretty mediocre and not something that I'm inclined to revisit anytime soon. And finally, number 21, Somebody to Love by Jordan Smith.
Somebody, can anybody find me somebody to love?
Okay, so here's my issue with people covering Queen and this song in particular. Freddie Mercury was a sort of very rare performer who could balance theatrical grace with raw, voice-shredding power and make it feel authentic and not feel very staged. And when you have covers performed on reality shows or on Glee, and everybody rushes to proclaim them the best thing since Freddie did it, my immediate reaction is to scoff because it's not like those shows will ever let them deliver the hard rock edge that underscored those classic Queen songs. Now, all that being said, I'll give Jordan Smith credit for getting really damn close. At this point, he's so obviously the frontrunner of The Voice that I don't know why anyone still cares about the other contestants. The charts certainly don't. And considering his sales and his viral success, it's clear that the public agrees here. And yet, I'm still not totally in love with this cover. And yes, it's mostly because of the gospel runs in the final lines. It strikes me as gratuitous and unneeded, especially when he makes it clear that he's one of the few that can actually bring some visceral punch to this song. And yeah, it's still not as raw or as driven by the rock sound as I'd prefer. I do appreciate that they kept some of the guitar solo in though. I'm not gonna deny though that Jordan Smith, he did a pretty damn fine job. I'd actually recommend this. It's pretty damn solid. And this week in mediocrity, it easily rose above everything else to snag the best of the week. Honorable mention, you know, it's not a great song, but I'm gonna give it to Rick Ross and Chris Brown for Sorry. Well, it's because the production there, fantastic. As to the worst, yeah, Dessert by Dawin and Silento runs away with this. But dishonorable mention going to Random by G-Eazy by being obnoxious as hell and that really bad guitar tuning. Let's pray for better next week, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Billboard Breakdown on Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.